Hello and welcome to Global Eye. President-elect Joe Biden has further cemented his victory by winning the state of Arizona. The state has voted Democrat only once since 1948, that is for Bill Clinton in 1996. World leaders have been congratulating Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. China, too, has congratulated the two leaders and has said it respects the choice of the American people. But U.S. President Donald Trump refuses to concede or allow the transition team to access intelligence briefings. He recently replaced key Pentagon officials, most importantly, Mark Esper, the U.S. Secretary of Defense. Now, more than 150 former national security officials have written to the U.S. government saying that any delay in transition of power poses a national security risk. Let's go across to our guest to understand these developments in the United States. We're joined by Missy Ryan, national security reporter at The Washington Post, and Carla Babb, Pentagon correspondent at Voice of America. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18 on Global Eye. Carla, if I can begin with you, tell us about the consequences of the dismissal of Mark Esper. According to Pentagon reporters, what is the reason for Donald Trump to do so?
Well, we are honestly still trying to figure that out. There's a lot of speculation, but no one has actually said why Secretary Esper was fired. We know that Secretary Esper had been clashing with President Donald Trump really since June. There was a decision President Trump had wanted to use active duty troops to quell protest against racial injustice. And we know that Secretary Esper at that time said that he did not want to do that and did not feel that that strong of a presence was needed, that that was the last resort to use against U.S. citizens. And so ever since that moment, there has been a lot of tension. But there are other things on the table that the president has wanted that has been pushed back against by the Pentagon as well. A full withdrawal from Afghanistan was mentioned in a tweet a few weeks ago, and the Pentagon then walked that back as much as they could because from the Pentagon's perspective, a full withdrawal would be very hasty, it would be very dangerous, costly, and that is not something they are looking at doing, especially because you have to work with your allies whenever you have an international coalition. So we're still trying to figure out exactly why he was fired, and it could very well be just that President Trump just did not like Secretary Esper and wanted to settle the score in his final few weeks in office.
Right. Missy, is there now a worry that in the remaining 60 to 70 days that President Trump has, he may misuse his power? Mark Esper is not the only official who has been dismissed.
That's right. There were a number of senior officials, civilian officials at the Pentagon who were also suddenly let go and replaced by people who are more closely affiliated with the White House and some of the more ideological statements that people around the president have made. And so, sure, there's definitely a concern that, like Carla was saying regarding Esper's departure, we don't know exactly why this was done, but there's certainly concern among the officials that we've talked to at the Pentagon that this could be some sort of step designed to pave the way for pushing through certain decisions that have been unpopular with the military leadership, like an abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan, or potentially setting things up for using the military in President Trump's continued attempt to deny the results of the November 3rd election.
Right. And Carla, if I can ask you about that, what really is the law? Because we hear that the General Services Administration is not allowing the transition team to access intelligence briefings or key U.S. government buildings. So how does this hamper the work of the Biden-Harris transition team?
Well, there has been concerns that this could hamper the transition. But on the flip side, there are many officials that have said, especially in Congress, that should they not start getting intelligence briefings by today, that they're going to try to step in and make sure that that happens. This is something we really haven't had to see in my lifetime because there's always been a smooth transition. There's always been a concession by the person who loses, and there's also always been an acceptance by the person who won. But because there are so many states that are still in play, according to the Trump campaign, they are holding off on making that concession speech, and they have really kind of put their foot down on moving forward on anything for the Biden campaign, which has been a hindrance. There have been some that have raised concerns that there was a delay in the transition between after the 2000 election. I do not think, and I've been speaking to officials, and this is why I'm thinking this way, former military officials have told me that should not be, this small delay should not have anything to do with hindering national security. There are several professionals, civilian and military, that can keep the Pentagon running smoothly in the interim. But every minute that Joe Biden does not get those briefings that he needs, that does delay his process a little bit. So we will have to keep watching that.
Right. So there are enough checks and balances in the U.S. political system there. But Missy, if I can ask you about that letter that is being spoken about in the U.S. media, 150 former national security officials writing to the U.S. government, the General Services Administration, to ask them to acknowledge President-elect and the Vice President-elect, allow them to work. And they're also saying that in case there is a delay in transition, there could be national security risks. On what basis do they say that, and what national security risks could these be?
Well, as Carla said, there definitely are checks and balances, and there's a whole team of people at the Pentagon who are working on the transition process, which would be preparing briefing books for the incoming officials when they are allowed to start their work and when they're formally in the building after January 20th. But at the same time, you know, it does raise the question about what would occur if there was some sort of significant challenge early in the early days of the Biden administration. You know, will people be fully up to speed? One example that people have cited is in the transition in 2001 because of the prolonged situation in Florida with the Bush-Gore presidential race, that this might have impacted the ability of the Bush administration to deal with the al-Qaeda threat. And then, of course, 9/11 came only months into George W. Bush's first presidency. So that's one example of the kind of thing. You know, it's not definitive, and you can always say, you know, these people are able to hit the ground running, but it's certainly not the situation you want.
Right. And I'll take my final questions now. Missy, do you get a sense that Donald Trump is losing support within the GOP, and there will soon be pressure on him to allow the transition team to access the Pentagon, those classified intelligence files as well?
You know, there have been some more Republican voices urging the president to acknowledge the result of the election, but he certainly has a lot of stalwart allies who are standing with him in the Senate, for example. And so I wouldn't expect him to abandon that plan right away. You know, it's only mid-November, and, you know, as you said, there's more than 60 days left. So at some point, there is going to be pressure from the GOP to allow these transition steps to proceed, but I just don't think we're there yet.
Right. And my final question to you, Carla, do you expect a legal challenge now, or a petition by the Biden-Harris transition team to make sure that they get control of those files, they get to access crucial information and daily intelligence briefings as well?
I think as we watch this play out in the coming days, I don't think that it will come to that based on what I'm hearing from former military officials and senior officials. This has just been a slow rollout, but it will come to a peaceful end, and a normal transition is what everybody is trying to assure me as much as possible. Because let's keep in mind that the Pentagon is a large bureaucracy, that the U.S. national security team that it has in place has many, many moving parts that are continuing to run smoothly. And while it is very critical that the people at the top and the future president of the United States, the president-elect, gets the briefings that he needs, everything will be able to run smoothly. And while it may take a few extra days once he gets, you know, to get himself going once the inauguration happens, nothing is going to be lost in the meantime. It's just going to be slowed down a little bit.
Right. Carla, thank you so much for joining us. And we'd like to thank Missy Ryan for joining us here on CNBC TV 18, putting that story in perspective for our viewers. It is something that the Indian government and Indian viewers are watching very closely as well. On that note, we take a short break, but when we return, we will put the focus on the India-France strategic and economic partnership. The French ambassador to India, Emmanuel Luna, and Trade Commissioner Eric Fajol speak exclusively to CNBC TV 18. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. India and France, which share a strong strategic partnership, have decided to foster closer ties during the COVID-19 pandemic. Recently, when France witnessed terror attacks and faced boycott calls, Prime Minister Modi sent a strong message of solidarity, saying India stands with France against terror. France has been working round the clock during the pandemic to ensure timely delivery of the Rafale jets. But the relationship isn't limited to strategic ties alone. France is the 9th largest foreign investor in India. There are over 150 Indian companies operating in France, employing more than 7,000 people, and bilateral trade in 2019 was approximately 11.6 billion euros. We caught up with the French ambassador to India, Emmanuel Luna, to speak about the India-France cooperation. I began by asking him about how France views the US election result. Listen in.
We're going to have a new momentum for a positive agenda. President Macron discussed with President-elect Joe Biden a few days ago, and together they discussed whether a new initiative could be taken for trade, as you mentioned, for global warming, for international peace and security, for global health. And I think we're going to see a very much more positive and much more multilateral commitment from the US, which is very good. And Europeans will welcome that partner. They will not change everything. I mean, the last few months, few years, you've seen a great effort within the EU to gather more strategic autonomy, to be more independent, and this is a long-term effort we will keep on doing and maybe accelerate.
Right, but you feel that some of the decisions that the previous administration had taken, those will be difficult to overturn?
Well, from what I see from the president-elect and his campaign, I mean, we've seen very positive signals from, and on the top of the list is the announcement that the US will come back to the Paris Agreement. I mean, we sure need all the nations of goodwill to team up if we want to be up to the challenges for the future generations. It's really important.
Just to now speak about the India-France relationship, the trading partnership, what next do you see for the India-France trade relationship?
Well, it's going, I said, pretty well, very well. I would expand the view. I mean, trade is one thing, but what more important is also investment, and it's a global relation with the supply chain of these days. I mean, French companies have been very, very positive with India, committed to long-term investing in the Make in India for decades now. And right now you have more than 600 French companies employing more than 350,000 people in India, and they are very bully, very optimistic about the prospect. Obviously, the situation in India these days is difficult, like in all our countries, but they see the capacity of rebounds as very effective, and they know that in the coming years, decades, your country is going to be a center for high growth in the world, so they want to invest more and more. And that's what has happened. I mean, during the COVID period, French companies have not slowed down on investment in India, just on the contrary. A company like Schneider Electric, they've invested in the last few months 1.5 billion euros. Group like Total, 500 million. These are big figures, and I'm confident that French companies will keep on investing in India because they believe in India.
Right. Are there any challenges that French companies are facing in India currently, something which you feel that the Indian government could possibly address?
Well, companies always want their business to be easier, but they all acknowledge that many progress have been made over the last few years. I mean, the leap that you can see in global rankings in terms of ease of doing business, I mean, the ranking of the World Bank is just something that was never seen in the past with any other country. I mean, it's a huge leap forward. So would they like to have even better infrastructures? Would they like to have even less regulation or red tape? Or, of course, yeah. I mean, if you ask any business what they would like, yes. But overall, the business environment is really good.
How important is it for India to seal this FTA with the European Union in today's day and age?
I think it's important for India and for Europe. I mean, the EU is the largest economy in the world, and it's #1 trade partner to India. I mean, India must be #2 export destination for Europe, so which means we have common interest to move on the FTA, because if we conclude an FTA, the trade between our countries will just rocket up. So it's really important. Then what does it take? I mean, why is it being discussed for years and without? Because it's an extremely technical and difficult agreement to conclude. And what does it take? What do we expect as Europeans? We want obviously an agreement which is balanced. I mean, win-win, and ambitious. I mean, it's no use trying to do an agreement which would be very specific or very. And when we say ambitious, it means ambitious in terms of sectors which will be covered, but also ambitious for the climate. I mean, it's a requisite from all the FTA now we conclude with the EU. We want to have provisions about the fight against climate change.
Now to speak about the India-France defense relationship, Florence Parly, the defense minister of France, was in India recently. She held bilateral conversations with Rajnath Singh. What direction has that given to our ties?
Well, you're right. Minister Parly went in times of COVID. She wanted to come to India physically. Why? Because that was the ferry of the first Rafale jet to India, and that was very important. Why? Because we are immensely proud that we've been able to deliver on time according to the contract in spite of COVID. As in India, in France, the factories beginning of COVID have been closed for a few weeks because of COVID, but in order to deliver on time, they've been working at night and during weekends, extra shift, just to be on time, and we're perfectly on time. I mean, 14 Rafale have been delivered to India, and already 8 have been ferried to India. So it's a magnificent accomplishment. Now, what did she discuss? I mean, all partnership. I mean, joint exercises, and we're going in 2021 to relaunch our exercises, either on sea, Varuna, or on ground, Shakti. We're going to move forward on that.
But, ambassadors, because we have now this big order of 36 Rafale jets which are coming in from France, does this create the right ecosystem for acquisition of more jets by India? Are there now talks for a larger contract?
Obviously, the Dassault and the French industrial companies are ready for more. I mean, they're ready to put some proposal for additional order. And as it seems that these jets fully satisfy the Indian Air Force, I'm pretty confident.
My final question would be on the issue of terrorism. France has gone through some gruesome terror attacks recently. How is the French government and the President Emmanuel Macron approaching the issue of terror after these recent spate of attacks? And how has been the cooperation between India and France on the issue of terror?
Well, very determined, very resilient. I mean, we're not going to surrender our values because of any sort of terrorist attacks. This is not our values. I mean, France is a country where you're free to believe or not to believe, to worship or not to worship, and you can discuss about any issues, and you can disagree. And this is the core of our nation, our values, our philosophy. So how should we fight against terrorism? I mean, with partners, and partners who are also threatened by terrorism, and India obviously is a privileged partner in this respect. I mean, we've been cooperating for long, and we're increasing our cooperation. We are sharing intelligence, we are sharing our best practices, we are also jointly training. Very proud because last week there was special units which were organizing some video conference with your special units to exchange also on their best practices. And we also try to work at the roots of terrorism and working a lot together on the financing of terrorism.
All right, so that was the French ambassador speaking exclusively to CNBC TV 18. Now, France is actively wooing Indian companies and is rolling out tax incentives to attract more investments. Speaking to CNBC TV 18, the French Trade Commissioner to India, Eric Fajol, said that France can be India's gateway to Europe and Africa. I began by asking him about the key sectors that the French government is focusing on. Listen in.
Actually, before post-COVID, we are still in a COVID situation, and I can tell you that the French government, since the first lockdown in March, has injected a lot of money to support business and people into their businesses, into their life. And Indian investors who are already in France have benefited from all these measures, especially investors in the automotive sector, in aeronautics, where we had special recovery plan of the government. Since September, the French government has announced a massive recovery plan of 100 billion euro. And the idea, it's linked with the lesson we have taken from the first lockdown, that we were too much dependent from some supplies from some part of Asia, especially for pharmaceutical products, health sector, for automotive aerospace product as well, and from technology and electronics. So, and the inputs for the industry, like raw materials. So the idea is to focus, that are becoming strategic sectors for us to address, and we want to attract investors.
Any specific incentives that would be given to Indian companies when you are attracting investments in these sectors?
Of course. I mean, Indian company, once they are in France, they are considered as a French company, so there is no difference. We have seen some, I've met some CEOs of Indian company. They have already benefited from state guarantee loans from the government. They have also receiving some support for employment fund, so they can keep their employees, and the government is paying for them during the lockdown. We have also reduced our tax on companies. It will reach 25% by 2022. And the government announced also a reduction of taxes for production. So all this can benefit for the current Indian investment, and for the newcomers, they can also have those kind of incentive. And our best incentive is very famous in Europe. I think we have the best system to attract R&D.
Why do you think France should be the country of choice for Indian investors and Indian businesses over other places in Europe?
I think because of COVID, as I said, because of the supply chain problem for all Europe, it's not only France who is depending from some Asian countries, but for the problem of supply chain due to COVID situation, that is very clear now that we have to change that problem of supply chain. And the second thing is because of Brexit. It was more about financial services till now, but I think the automotive sector, the industry also should see France as a key strategic point for Europe because of Brexit, but also for Africa. We have some Indian investors, especially in south of France, who, because we speak French in all this country in Africa, they are using their headquarters in France to address the African market.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Many thanks for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18. News and updates continue on the other side.